Cool.
My name is John Andrew Williams. Today I have Alyn Waller as my guest on the Coaching of Flourish podcast. Welcome, Alyn. I am so psyched for today. I've been had this on the calendar and just excited. I heard about you from a couple of the trainers, and I'm just honored that you're here and really looking forward to this time together.
Well, thank you, man. I am really looking forward to this conversation as well.
Me too. I know we got into it a little bit before we pressed the live button, but I'd love to hear your story and how you get. Let's go with your story and
Okay.
The long version.
Yeah. With the long version of the story, or the
version? We can maybe go long, but we'll see. We'll see.
Well, so my name is Alyn Waller, and I am senior pastor of Enon Tabernacle Baptist Church in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I have been pastoring now for 30 years. I've been at this particular church for going on 27 years now. And I love what I do. I love helping people. I love living in the prophetic tradition of the Black church. I am fourth generation pastor, preacher in my family. My father, my grandfather, my great-grandfather, literally going back to slave preachers in the tradition of Nat Turner is my family story. And, I usually, if we had time, I would have brought my prized possession, and that is me sitting on Martin Luther King's lap when I was 3 years old. I'm sitting on his lap, and I have won every show and tell from kindergarten until this past Martin Luther King Day. Every time I bring that picture out, it's the winner, and I've had it all of my life. He and my father were friends, and he was preaching for my father in September of 1967. That's when he began to talk about the Vietnam War. And I've always had that picture because it reminds me of the role of Black clergy in America, and that is to live in the tension of the claims and the call of God on all of our lives, and the tension to live that out in what Maya Angelou calls these yet to be United States. And I think Martin Luther King's legacy is what we're trying to live into. Yeah.
Wow. What was it like to listen to Amanda Gorman in the inauguration?
Oh man, that was amazing. I'm like, who is she?
Right.
I am looking forward to figuring out how I am going to meet her and have her come to my church. I'm going to make that happen. I don't know how that is going to happen, but our paths are going to cross. At this season in my life, I'm looking for the next generation of leaders and how I can be a part of supporting and sowing into, and she definitely is a voice. And so I think she was right for the moment, and she was spot on. Yeah.
It was to me, it just is the power of words and poetry. And there is such a rich tradition of amazing speeches by Black people throughout the history. And I mean, you're thinking about my daughters, they do a lot of, we homeschool, and Moise was looking at different history programs. And there's this one that goes through, was it Black speeches through the last 200 years, and how the power of these words to move. I mean, as a preacher, how do you approach that on a weekly basis?
Well, there is an oral tradition that informs the African-American community that ties back to the African griot. And our community has always had a love for the English transliteration of it is the man or woman of words. And so whether it's the African griot or the rapper or the preacher, there is a love for and appreciation for the man or woman of words in our community. And so that's more than just a speaker. It is, on some level, it harkens back to an understanding of oracle or prophet. And so it's awesome. I mean, it's a scary thing because on some level, to those who would not accept our theological bent, it is precocious to think that one can stand and speak for God. But when you live in the tension of that, it's an awesome experience to think that what I say this week, somebody is going to listen to and make some life changes according to what comes out of my mouth. It's scary, and there's a lot of weight to it, but it's also an honor to be chosen by God and people, because just because God chooses you doesn't mean people have to. And so for people to honor you by coming back to hear is a huge responsibility, because in this post-truth reality that we live in, people are wanting to hear something that rings as authentic. And that's the real challenge of the moment.
Right. It feels like there are two alternate realities happening.
Yeah.
You know, and it's just, I mean, throughout history, if you go back, you know, post-pandemic, there's always a cultural flourishing. There's always, it seems to be two forces that oppose, you know, each other in this movement. Well, my mind's blown a little bit. So you have this picture. Your dad was friends with MLK, and here you are. You have a picture, and now you are a pastor. At what point in time did you know? Yeah, that's for me. I want to be a man of God and do this.
Well, now that's interesting, because I've been in ministry since I was 23, but that period of time between 18 and 22 and a half, I was running in the exact opposite direction. I mean, I really wanted no parts of this. In my other life, I'm a musician. My undergrad was music, and what I really wanted to be was a musician. I wanted to sing and dance. I wanted to do theater. I wanted to have my day in the sun after Peabo Bryson and Teddy Pendergrass and all of that. And I had a very powerful calling experience on the campus of Ohio University. It includes the death of my brother. It includes a struggle with hearing God's voice and wanting nothing to do with religion at the time. But I knew in that moment, my heart was so open because of the pain of the loss of my brother. I could clearly hear God's voice saying that this is what I was to do, and to live in the gap of what was at the time, the Black church in the late 80s was on a 15-year decline that then preceded what was sort of a church growth era that begins about the mid 80s through the 90s. And I like to think of myself as being a part of that church growth era. I pastor what some people would call a mega church. Now, that's not our term. That's a sociological term. I just call it a church, but it is large. And some of my peers who started pastoring in the late 80s, early 90s, a few of us across the country have been blessed to be a part of what I think is a phenomenon over the last 20 years. And it has happened where there's been a spiritual word wrapped in cultural relevance that met the needs of the day. And that's what I'd like to think that I've been a part of, keeping in the tradition of the Black prophetic tradition, which is Martin King and so forth.
I could just listen to you all day, Alyn.
I appreciate that.
I love the way it's, you know, I've listened to a lot of people and I've coached a lot of people. And one of the things I really appreciate about this training is just being able to go over there 100% and be empathetic and feel the ideas, like putting together ideas.
Yeah.
There's such a tangibility to the ideas you're putting together that it's almost like you can feel the blocks of your thinking fall in place. I mean, we in the 2.0, because I got to lead there and I heard you coach a little bit too. I just felt this immediate safe space that you create. Where where does that come from? I mean, that may be a hard question to answer, but like, where do you feel like when you're in that, like, because it's here now. I mean, there's immediate safety here created.
And I think that's where the overlap of the counseling piece. My background is pastoral counseling. I have a doctorate in marriage and family counseling. And I think whether you're talking about coaching or counseling, our job is to create a space where the person can come in and be authentic. I think that for most people, the answers are in there. We have to help create space for them to get at it. So we would call it level 2 listening, and really sort of sit over there next to them and help them clear out some of the weeds so that they can do the thinking themselves. That's pastoral counseling. And I think that's a bit of what the coaching space is. Let me create an atmosphere where you can come in and sit down. And so that's what I think, and that's what I'm hoping to hone those skills. I like to put it this way: counseling looks back, pastoral counseling looks up, and coaching looks forward. But there's some similar tools in each case.
There's a lot of overlap, and it's wonderful when people take this training, like take coach training, and then it influences all the other areas of their life, like where they're looking at, and vice versa. Like there's, coaching comes from, I mean, it very similar to, the church movement in the 80s, 90s. Coaching is that's when coaching was developing with, a lot of the mentorship program in the 80s. You have sports psychology start to take center stage. I mean, I feel like there's some parallels that people are thirsty for inner fulfillment. And it's almost like the more outer stuff we get, the thirstier people get internal. And what we're really looking for is just connection. Like,
exactly.
We just want to be seen for authentic us and loved.
That's right. Just seen, heard, given room to, there's such a cry for perfection out here, and that none of us are. So that when you find a space where you can be yourself and not have to perform, but you can actually breathe and think, that's where I think most of us can be our best selves. And so those of us who are going to coach, we have to create that context for people. And then they'll feel safe enough to risk, and in risk, there's growth. If there's growth, that's what we wanted. That's what we wanted to do for and with them.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's the beauty of the coaching model is it gives a structure for how to provide space. Like it gives a structure for, this is how curiosity works at its best in service of other. It really feels like, an idea that I've been, enamored with, this idea of servant leadership. It's like servant listening in a sense. Like it just brings out, like, I'm listening for your sake, not mine. And I feel like it's like a radical, it's a radical shift from, how we're taught to listen and go that way.
You're exactly right. It's interesting you use that term, because that's the term we use in our church. We don't have traditional chairmen and presidents of leaders or bosses. If you're head of something in our church, you're a servant leader. And that's literally what we mean. You serve, you lead by serving. You lead by caring more about the other and attending to their needs, and in doing so, giving them permission to do and to be.
Right. Yeah. So this is 2020 was quite a year. I mean, you have a couple of crises. You have the pandemic, and then in the summer, racial equality. What was your role as a pastor? Like, how did that test you and stretch you over the past year?
Wow, a number of ways. Of course, with I think the pandemic was necessary so that it pushed all of us to the boiling point to force change. I think if there were no pandemic, if we were not home to watch George Floyd and what happened to him and Breonna Taylor, if we were not home to see the mendacity and hypocrisy of our political system, if we were not home to feel that, my fear is that we've become so numb to the mendacity and hypocrisy of our country, those moments would have just passed us by. And so I think that my job as pastor was to help people feel covered and connected because we were at home. And then we have a responsibility of interpreting the times. I'm 56 years old, so my journey is, I didn't learn anything new about America last year that I wasn't born into. I was born into the 60s. I lived through the 70s as a child. America didn't show me anything new, but it was important for me to help my children understand that the monster we fought before didn't die. And so we needed to tie in the two, the world I was born into and the world that I'm now living in is the same thing. This is our 60s. And so helping people to appreciate what we saw in the 60s, even reinterpreting rioting. You know, rioting was much different in the 60s than what you saw here in the 90s, and helping people understand how you connect march to political process. You march across the Pettus Bridge because you want voters legislation. You march on Washington because you want civil rights. You don't get on the bus because you want changes in the bus. And so those that are our age were saying to this next generation, it's good, let's be angry, but let's also make sure we have a demand on the table. So let's not just walk down there. Let's make sure we have something about police reform. Let's talk about education. Let's talk about how we deal with the health disparities and the social determinants of health in this moment. And so our job has been to interpret the season and connect the two movements so that nothing is lost in the translation.
Right. And I think as a white person, it's easy to go through life without having to touch the issue of racial equality. That's just that's where it's at. And that scares me, like as a white person. Amoyes is Latinx. And I don't know if I would know as much about race if I know that I wouldn't know as much about race and racial equality if I weren't married to her. And I think it's hard to know, like, for people to understand, like, how much there's microaggressions. There's just so, like, it's just, it's you can't get there. I feel like the gap between, like you said, like, it's nothing new. This summer changed nothing new. But for many white people, it was this huge awakening. Like, are you, like, they all of a sudden, what was that like to see that huge awakening, knowing, okay, yeah, we've known this, like get with the program. Like, this has been happening for decades. Like, why are you now just hopping on this train?
Right. And so well, two things for me. I actually grew up in a place called Shaker Heights in Cleveland, Ohio.
All right. I grew up in Pittsburgh. Yeah, I know where that is.
Well,
what's up?
But my first church was in Pittsburgh.
All right, where in Pittsburgh?
Out in Denora, in the valley, the Monongahela Valley.
I grew up in South Hills.
Okay, got you. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. All right, so we got to catch up. So I grew up well-seated in the middle class experience with a bunch of white friends. So and Shaker Heights. If you've ever seen the series Little Fires Everywhere, that was in Shaker Heights. Shaker Heights was an intentional community that was intentionally diverse, intentionally integrated. If your family moved to Shaker Heights, my mother would show you a Black neighborhood. If my family moved to Shaker Heights, my mother's job was to show that Black family a white neighborhood. it was an intentional experiment in America. So I've grown up in what I know can happen. America just has to catch up to it. The only difference, I mean, there are a number of differences. I've been raised to think about what it means to be Black in America. America never forced you to have to ask, what does it mean to be white? So you now have to ask some questions that we were raised answering. What is white privilege? What does it mean to have white skin in this country? How is that different? And so it's not that our communities don't wrestle with the same things. We romanticized poverty in white people or hid it. So we grew up with Dukes of Hazzard, Bo and Luke Duke, and they actually drove a General Lee, and we made it nice. We made it a sitcom when it was Bo and Luke Duke that tried to take over the White House 2 weeks ago. But we were raised to not be afraid of them. And we were raised to think that they're good old boys, but we demonize Black poverty. So you're raised to be afraid of Black people, raised to believe that Bo and Luke are harmless. And that's why we weren't prepared for them, because they're harmless. They're coming down here. We know they're coming, but they're just good old boys. Had they thought a bunch of Black people were coming, there would have been nuclear bombs outside of the Capitol.
Well, they had those photos of all of the people, like, you know, the guard guarding a statue. Like,
exactly.
Hardly, like, what? Like, that's a
Exactly.
statue. You know, like, what's going on here?
So but this is the wonderful time for us to change. Mm-hmm. This is a wonderful time for us to have hard conversations. Everybody's community is going to have to walk and chew gum at the same time. Everybody's going to have to accept that their community brings something wonderful to the table. And then there is a thing that we have, it's called internalized oppression. If you've been told that you are something long enough, you will begin to act like it. And so we have to challenge internalized oppression in our own community. And we have to challenge the downright hypocrisy and mendacity that comes to us from the larger community. I've been very hurt by what seems to be a selling out of our faith by white evangelicals. It's like, oh my God, are you all really going to support all this? I know. You know what our book says, and you're just acting like it's not there. I can't believe it.
I mean, that's got to be uncomfortable when you all meet in his room and that comes up. Like, what happens next? Yeah.
I went to Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. I got my Master of Divinity with a bunch of white evangelicals. And I'm like, we know what we believe the Bible says. Right. We know what we believe about the importance of morality in the leader. And they just sort of turn that whole page off for whatever. And that's the challenge of this moment in America.
Right. Yeah. And it's a hard one to take too, because you're looking at, you know, if you're standing from an outside perspective and you're looking at the church movement and where that's going, I mean, it's a tough hill to climb in terms of,
it really is.
You know, really, that's what we have to accept. Like it's wild that racial justice is even politicized in the first place. Like, that's what I'm like, it's not, I don't think it, from a value standpoint, it's really that far away from mainstream values if they were to have, let's call it empathy training, like where you can imagine, and this to me is where I look at coaching and say, I believe that if every teacher were trained to be an academic life coach, or coaching was more like ubiquitous, that would solve like a lot. I feel like it's an empathy deficit that the primary issue is that we're in an empathy deficit right now. And there's an airplane outside. You hear?
I hear you. Yeah. No, and I hear you, and I think that I know what you're getting at, and I agree. I think that there's as a theologian, there's a fundamental heart thing that has to change. You know, one of the things that I honestly believe about myself, I love the species called human being. I really do. I love people. just however they come. I love
Mm.
people. Um, and you got to have a love for people,
Yeah.
not just your people, the species. Um, and in too many cases, we are trained to love our own people. And then not only are we trained to love our own people, we've been given, as Isabella Wilkerson says in her book, Caste, in America, there's a caste system. And we've all been trained in it. And at the top of the caste is white. And it goes down. We used to have a thing that was said, if you're white, you're right. If you're brown, stick around. If you're black, get back. We grew up with that. And that is America. And we have to change it. And this summer we said, we're not doing that anymore. We're just not.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, then you get to ideas of like, intersectionality of you add the oppression of women, you add,
Mhm.
all of the different kind of biases. And I mean, it's pretty intense. And, Moise and I, we talk about it a lot, where it's, we were on a cross country trip and, we get to certain places and it's like, all right, you just stay in the car. I'll deal with the business that we need to be dealt with. Just knowing that I would be treated differently from her. And that was just, we just knew that. And it was like this, I feel like that there's a tension between, there's a reality of we just have to get certain stuff done. And then how much can we fight against, how much can we fight against the system and try to change it? But then it feels like in that space there, you have to open yourself up to so much vulnerability and
Yes,
there's
sir.
so much pain in that. How do you manage that balance point?
Well, and thank you for that. I think first of all, we know I believe in calling. I'm called to do this work, and that's important. And I
Yeah.
think you have to believe that. I believe that I'm
Right.
called to do this work. Um, and that's when also you have to make sure that you have something totally outside of the work that allows you to exhale.
Mm.
In my other life, I love martial arts and music.
Right.
And I do both of them at what I'd like to think is a high level. And they are both so that I can exhale. Because if all you do is work and all you do is try to save the world, and if all you do is do what you do, you will burn yourself out. So all of us, even doing this coaching work, you have to have some place to take the stuff. Yes, we're curious and we ask questions, but when you spend time with someone helping them unpack, you take some of that on. And you've got to have some place to take it and something to do with it. And that is getting your own coach, doing your own counseling and doing your own therapy, having a release. And for me, recognizing, and this is churchy language, this battle is not mine, it's the Lord's. And so remember what part of this we can't fix. And that has to be fixed by the larger truth that is our world.
Right. No, it's powerful when you start to really lean into trust and to have a
Yeah.
calling and a larger purpose. I mean, I just feel like there's so much, like call it like emotional power that you can. It's like you almost have like inner emotional superpower in
Mm-hmm.
in the ability to continue to move forward. That's amazing. So what do you love to play? What's your favorite in music?
Well, my favorite music, of course, is gospel music. So I sing and play the piano and organ at a high level. I play at the trumpet and
Okay.
play at the guitar. But I love gospel music, and then after that is sort of the R&B, jazz, blues
Yeah.
thing. So the Black musical tradition is what I've been trained in, and it's what I love to do.
That's amazing. I love it. I doodle around on the piano, but I'm terrible. Like I'm. Oh
Okay.
yeah, it's mostly just at nighttime while the littles are getting to sleepy. I just
Got you.
not
Got
much,
you.
not much. I worked at a classical music library in college. It was my work study at Orwig, and so I
Okay.
got really
Yeah.
into classical jazz. That kind of Miles Davis kind of blues, my absolute
Yeah,
favorite,
yeah,
that kind of
yeah.
stuff. But I love Bach. I go
Okay.
super nerdy. But
I did enough of that to get my degree. Um,
yeah.
but I had a band when I was in college. The name of the band was Bluesimus Maximus. Bluesimus Maximus. And we were a hot blues band in Southern Ohio. We played all the college homecomings
Oh, that's awesome.
and we did the Stevie Ray Vaughan stuff, B.B.
Right.
King stuff. And that was fun. That was just
Mhm,
pure
mhm.
fun, sometimes pure debauchery too. But
Right.
that's how I paid for my fun in school. And the musically, there's a connection between blues, gospel, jazz. It's all sits down there, coming out of New Orleans, over from Africa, down
Mhm.
from Europe, and it's a great tradition, and it finds itself in the church. And so, by playing gospel music, you get to play a little bit of it all. And while it is highly improvisational, it is just as disciplined as anything Bach or Mozart did as well, if you appreciate the craft.
Oh, it's yeah, I mean, I have like tremendous respect for people who can hear and then improvise and go back and forth. It's a
Mhm.
conversation. I mean, it's
That's
like
right.
it's
That's right.
literally speaking another language,
Yeah.
that you
Yeah.
have to hear, you have to be in it. See the movie Soul? We don't watch many
Yeah, I
movies
did.
as a family, but I mean,
Okay.
with what time, like TV, a lot of TV shows are just lost on me. I tell them always like, when we're 80, 90, then I'll binge watch all of the shows and we'll catch up,
Got you. Got
but
you.
in the meantime, we're locked in, the kid thing. But we saw Soul. It was amazing. What'd you think?
Well, you know what? So I have to wear two hats, so
Go
I
for it.
am fundamentally trained as a theologian. So I have some real thoughts about what heaven is and what heaven is not. So I had to allow myself to say, okay, this is not a theological treatise about what we believe about ultimate truth. But what I did appreciate about it is it kind of get at the core of what motivates us and how you connect with purpose. What I really appreciated in Soul is when they talk the difference between spark and purpose.
Right.
And he talked about what was your spark that kind of kicked you in gear to connect with purpose. And that allowed me to think through. Sometimes people want to live in the spark and they never get on to their purpose. And so even as we coach, helping people make the connection with that which sort of woke them up, but then what is that is calling them onto their better selves. And so I really appreciated Soul. But not only did I appreciate Soul for that, I appreciated that it was a Black man, it was a cartoon, it was an animation, and we were in it, and our music was in it. And that's the stuff that we're talking about. When we start talking about really getting at this, when we start seeing superheroes that look like us, when we start seeing animations that are not about the traditional Black story of poverty, just about some of the bright lights of what it means to be African and American, that helps this country get better. And so for those reasons, I really appreciated it.
Right. And like Black Panther, I mean, the whole impact of Black Panther is like phenomenal. I
Yeah.
have a good college buddy, Smitty. His real name's Edward Smith. He lives in DC. He's a lawyer. And he said for him, like it was, as a child, he never saw an African-American like dressed like a professional in traditional African dress as a role model. And the impact that movie had, like just that, like you said, the final image, you said he's seen it like 3 times, and that was, I mean, I was, I think I was speaking in New York or something, and I was alone. I went and saw it solo, and the impact was, I just felt this, like, finally, finally, what does, how do you manage like your emotion around the pace of progress? Like,
Well, so
yeah.
so Spike Lee mentioned Black Panther in his movie Do the Right Thing back in 1989. So for those of us who have been conscious, this was like, well, it's about time.
Right,
Well,
right.
We've known the so Black Panther wasn't created 3 years ago. Black Panther was a comic book in the 80s that some of us knew about. And when all the movies were throwing every other superhero, for us, we're like, so when are you going to get to Black Panther? And when are you going to, and Spike Lee tried to tell people that this existed. So for those of us that have been conscious, it's all right, it's about time, but I refuse to get but so celebratory because it took so long.
Right.
And I don't want anybody to think that now we've gotten ours. We got to keep going. We got to keep going and do more, because this is, if you stab me in the back with a 7-inch knife and pull it out 5 inches, 2 inches is still in there.
Right.
And
right.
sometimes some of what we see happening now is pulling the knife out 5 inches, but the knife is still in the back. And so we want people to understand we've got a long way to go. Thank God for Black Panther. Thank God for all of that. But I want people to know that Wakanda is not real, but Uganda is real. Right. And Kenya is real. And there's poverty there right now. And there are reasons that the continent of Africa looks like it looks because of the intentional divesting in Africa. And it is important for us as African Americans to recognize the need. The reason I am called African American is because African American is a type of Black person. And so, the debate right now is, what do we call Kamala? Kamala is not African American. I am African American. We're both Black. And we want people to understand that and deal with that and understand the diversity that is us before there's ever a European in the conversation.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's like, there is I feel like the amount of knowledge needed to get up on these issues is, I mean, it's a sensitive area. I mean, it's just, there's no doubt about it. It's uncomfortable. It's sensitive. It's like, where are we? And I mean, I read a critique of soul in the New Yorker. I forget who authored it. She was a professor at Harvard. I thought it was amazing too. Like, in that sense of, the other side of, some of the things that she was pointing out, some of the things that were not great about how soul treated race and, in the complexity of it, where it feels like exactly what you're talking about. Like, yay, good job. Like, we've got there, but, there's still more to go. And it feels like that's the common thing. But I mean, I guess we'll see how.
And we're going to get there, because, I mean, think about it this way. Here we are, you and I, having this conversation. You're from Pittsburgh, I'm from Cleveland. I mean, the whole Portland, Philly thing. And right now, and we're doing this, and we're having a conversation, and this really is how we're going to get there.
Right.
I mean, I assume you are quite a few years younger than I am, and you're white, I'm Black. I mean, but we hold the answer, and particularly me and you, because when you really peel back this onion, there is a tradition in this country, and there's a legacy of Black and white men, and we still have to wrestle with each other. We can be diverse, and just as soon as you throw a Black man and a white man in the mix, we trouble the water. And there is stuff that we have to fix with ourselves, and it happens in this moment, and what you and I are doing right now.
Right. Yeah. I mean, just even going here and being able to talk like this is newish, in terms of what's happening. I feel super fortunate. I mean, I feel like I grew up with a heightened awareness of social justice from the church.
Yep.
And also I went to a magnet school in elementary school
Okay.
in St. Louis. So I went to a school that was 40% white, 60% black. And so I did the opposite. So we lived in the suburbs, but they took the little bus into the city.
Yeah.
And I mean, for me, it just felt like I never, I mean, it was in this space. I mean, part of me wishes they had gone even more into it, but this is the late 80s, 90s. I mean, this was still like kind of, I mean, even talking about race wasn't, the war on drugs was not, it wasn't seen in the context that it's seen now.
Yeah.
But again, I feel fortunate, at least I was that far I was that far along at that point in time. I see what, some of the things that we're trying to do, even coaching, I mean, looking at the coaching world, one of the things that Coach Training EDU is trying to do is, I mean, we're trying to make coaching accessible to different populations that historically have not had access to coaching. And it's one of these things that for me feels larger than, it's larger than any one organization. It truly is a movement. It's a movement of empowered empathy that empowers. And it feels like there's a lot of, I don't know, not the word resistant. I mean, resistance comes to mind, but I think it's hesitance. And there's a lot of, when we try to move these programs forward, there feels like there's a guardedness to it. Like, oh, here's another white person who has another program, is bringing it into a school, like this kind of thing. But I feel that softening too.
Yeah, I think that there's some of that. I think that there might be some interdisciplinary stuff. So I am a trained counselor. I have my doctorate in marriage and family counseling. Done a lot of work, and I find that when I bring up coaching in some of my counseling circles, they feel as if this is a bunch of people trying to do our work without the requisite training. And helping people understand that this is not sort of a flighty anti-counseling world. But I find that it's like, and all coaching programs are not equal. When I got involved, when I got my coach and I realized I want this, and I started looking to get trained, there's some junk out there as well. And, there are these, and I don't want to cast aspersion on anything, but, you go spend the afternoon with somebody and you're a certified coach. And then they're hanging shingles. And I think those of us who have done the work in counseling, who know that everything is not fixed with a future self exercise, wonder what it is. And so I think that the more you have credible programs like CTEDU and persons who recognize what coaching is and what it's not, and bring a weight to this, it's going to be better.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's happening as the profession ages. Grows a little bit. I mean, I feel like there's a natural progression. I mean, even in Oregon, there was a couple of years ago, there was a bill that made it to the state house, where they were looking at term like officially recognizing the word coaching. So you can't call yourself a coach unless you've gone, there are certain standards.
Right.
Certain other forces in the life coaching world fought against it because they didn't want a state to do this. And that's, to me, felt counterproductive. So the coaching world itself is not a unified force in this, which is a little disappointing. Did you hear that? Hear the bird?
Is that a bird?
Yeah, it's a bald eagle.
Oh, wow.
They come around in the wintertime. Yeah. We have a tree and it lands there, and okay. It gets noisy.
And not too many eagles around here.
I
Philadelphia
mean,
Eagles.
right. I mean, they're huge. They're huge big birds. I mean, my 1-year-old gets
Yeah.
scared. Like he in the house, he's probably freaking out. I mean, if we're trying, you're safe, but maybe not. I mean, they're big animals, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's nice out today. But I feel like so. But I think eventually it's going to happen. That coaching is going to get more and more recognized, and it's going
I
to.
think so.
And it's going to get into a school. There's going to be a school, or there's going to be a larger organization that's going to bring it to maybe even a school district or even a city or something like this, that I feel like
Yeah.
is going to really shift people's awareness of what coaching is and isn't. How do you, I mean, as a pastor, I mean, you probably see it a lot, like with the people in your church. I mean, what's their response to coaching? Or I imagine they know that you're being trained as a coach, or you're adding
Yeah.
this. And I mean, what's their response to it?
Well, I think that there's a slow response, and I'm thinking through right now what it means to be a coach, but also what it means to be a pastor. And so right in through here, I am starting my coaching business, but I don't necessarily take on clients who are also members of my church. And there's this fee thing, and then there's this thing where you should be able to come see your pastor if you
Right.
need to see your pastor. And so they're two different things. So I'm thinking that through, and I have a mentor, a coaching mentor, who's helping me think through that stuff.
Okay.
I find that people, the appetite for what people are coming to pastors for is changing. When I was in Pittsburgh, people used to expect the pastoral visit, come by the house, check on them, the pastoral visit. Here in Philly, it's much more of I'll come to your office, pastor, to speak with you. I think that people like there's not as much stigma around being coached as there is being counseled. I'm noticing that. And in the community, I think that what I'm seeing around professional people is what I experienced. You're along in your profession and you're ready to make a change and or get to the next level or unlock your third gear, and you need help with it. And a coach is who can help you. And so I'm hoping to fit in that niche in my own community with other pastors, politicians, and pre-C-suite executives. And I find that there is a greater openness to getting coached when it's couched in a let me help you get to your next place context.
I mean, you're in a perfect position to build a coaching practice. Like you could build whatever coaching practice you want, and especially with your background, to work with other clergy people in that space. I mean, it's almost like how many people do you how much time do you have? I mean, it's
Right.
I would imagine, there's just there's my 1-year-old playing with the puppy, and Moise is like out there doing.
Got you.
Woo! It's a lot. Wow. So, I mean, this is where when you're talking to the people who are like your potential clients in the space, what do you see as like maybe the top, like not the primary, but a few of the primary challenges that your target audience faces?
The primary challenge that my target audience is facing is, what does it look like to be me, meaning them, post-COVID and post-church reality? So, I'm thinking through who my target person is, and it's pastors and politicians and those that are thinking through how they do what they do for the community. The church is changing. America is not the Christendom that it was. And we are post-church growth. And now pastors who have been trained to be pastors in the old model feel lost. and are not really sure what this thing is going to be. I think politics has been turned on its head because of a post-truth reality. And how does it look to be an authentic person to honestly serve people and do right post-Trump when doing right doesn't pay? So I find that people that I am dealing with are raising the question, how can I be authentic in this inauthentic world? And they need help thinking through and believing in some of the very tenets of our faith, but also tenets of what we believe about humanity. It really does serve, it really does work to be authentic. It really does work to tell the truth and to live truthfully. And you really can be successful by being your best self. And helping people wrap their heads around that in the midst of so much mendacity and hypocrisy is the challenge for the next decade.
Right. I mean, historically, this is not anything new. If you look back, I mean, I'm trained as a Greek and Roman historian in some ways.
Gotcha.
And you look at, from like the whole, the long standpoint. I mean, it's not, there are parallels, they aren't, aren't pretty. What happens to a society that can't figure this out, can't figure out if they're two different sides that are not doing it. Looking at, I have a couple coaching questions that ask, but this has been one of my favorite interviews. I love them all. I feel like they all have their own little, nuggets here, but this one, I feel like I think there's some elements where these kind of conversations, sensitive, talking about, racial justice, getting into it, it's a big deal. It's, it's really wading into political waters and trying to figure out, okay, what are we doing here? I mean, to me, it's beyond political, even though it does get tied into political parties. This way more than I just, and what you have to, who you have to meet, how you, in what context you meet them with. And shifting, looking at the coaching questions, I love asking the two questions. One, favorite coaching topic in the 1.0, 2.0 so far, and or ones that you find that you use a lot. And then two, advice for someone just starting out their coaching journey. Yeah.
Well, I find that I like working with sort of the future self stuff. That's why I brought it up earlier. Because for me, in my life, I have always been sort of throw a goal out there and run up and catch it. That's sort of how I live. And so that future self thing gives me the stuff to work with. So that's who you are up there. So how do we get there? And it opens up the dialogue. So I really like the future self thing.
That's one of my favorites too. Fun fact, I am now, I'm 40, turned 40 in COVID in May, right? And the Moist is 40, we're about 2 weeks, I'm 2 weeks older, right? 2.5 weeks older. And my first future self, I first did the future self when I was 27 years old. That's when I first did my first future self, and he was 36. My first future self was 36. My second future self was 45. So I'm now older than my first future self. And I like the idea of yourself static, where you don't have, like, their age stays the same and you just collect them, like you collect different perspectives. And I thought to myself, it's amazing to see how much of that dream of a 27-year-old is reality. Like it's wild. And I think one thing that I deeply appreciate about the whole idea of, like you're saying, like going out to that goal and get it. What did you feel shift when you first did that future self exercise, where you crafted, a relationship with you, about a decade in the future?
Yeah. Well, I think it made it real. When you go through it and you do it, now you have something to shoot for. And then for me, that has always been a major motivator. So for me, to have nothing to work for is existential death. The day that I wake up and there's no future to go after is that I'm done. In
Mhm.
fact, that's why when, last week we were talking about future self, I think the older you get, that becomes an even dicier conversation,
Right.
because how much future do you have, and how much energy do you have, and how much um, are you supposed to have now? And when you get to a certain age and you're not there yet, that changes the internal dialogue. So
Right.
I, at 56, there's some things that that I need to have sort of hanging on the shelf now. And if they're still out there in the future, that becomes depressing. It doesn't become motivating.
Right.
And so it's an interesting conversation. But when I do it, it helps me. And this is part of, I'm working on retirement. So when I even think about coaching, some of what I see in coaching is post-pastoring. Who I am in coaching, I plan on being sort of a little Yoda sitting on top of a mountain, and all the little pastors are going to come climb the mountain to find me to help. So that's my future self, with the green ears on top of the mountain and looking for the rest of the guys to come and figure it out.
You make them stand in the rain for 3 days before you even look at them.
There it is. There it is. I stood in the rain.
Oh gosh. I mean, I feel like even like once you find coaching, I feel like the idea of retirement just doesn't make sense, because the profession itself is so fulfilling. Like I plan on working with people forever, 80, 90, like I still plan on having my, people, like you're saying, like, younger generation that you can work with.
Well, and coaching for me, it will be that without the burden of having to give a PhD dissertation every Sunday.
Right.
So coaching, I won't have to put the other 25 hours in the week in on a sermon. I'll be able to do this without worried about standing up at the end of the week and having a sermon to preach. And that really is the difference.
Right.
I'll always want to help people and help move people along.
Yeah, I was this close to, we talk about this. I was this close to going into, clergy too. And I always imagine, so I've given a couple guest things at different churches. I always imagine it's such a rush, to be up there and to let yourself like be moved.
It is, but if you take it seriously, there's the preparation. I think that there's an assumption, because it's like jazz. A jazz musician is just as trained as a classical musician and puts in just as much work. And all the work is what allows you to have the freedom of the moment. And so there is an extemporaneous aspect of Sunday morning, but it is because of the 30 hours you put in the week before. That allows you. It's the reading that you've done before. It's the time that you spend with God that you do before that opens up all the possibilities. The only reason you can play riffs is because you have meticulously played all the scales over and over again. And so it's not just sort of standing up there and hollering. It is bringing all of that week to that moment. And it's rewarding. I love it. And it's exhausting. And when it's over, you go home and you go to sleep, and you avoid people Monday morning, and then you start all over again.
Right. Yeah, there was a time period when, before Coach Training EDU grew to where it is now, where I was doing most of it, myself. And I was leading 20 hours of coach training a week. And after Friday, I would flop over and I would be just, out all Saturday, just recover, and then do like rinse and repeat. It was wild 2 or 3 years like that. I can't imagine 25 years you've been in this.
Well, I've been at this church 27 years, and I served the church in Pittsburgh for 4 years before that.
Okay. Wow. I mean, that's that's a legacy right there. That's a legacy right there.
Yeah, it really is. I've watched, I am now beginning to bless the babies of babies that I blessed. That's the wildest thing. When you
Yeah.
held a baby and
Wow.
now you're holding that baby's baby and praying for it, that's a generation. That's
Wow.
the goal. And you want to be around to
Right.
be with one community. That's the prize, not going everywhere and being all things to all people, but being with one group of people and riding your generation with them. And it'll be over, it'll be over. There needs to come another younger man or woman to pastor the next generation through.
Right.
And I need to hand this off to them in a few more years. But that's the joy of it, to watch people get born, to do all the stuff, to bless babies and baptize them and marry them and bury them, and all of the stuff that we bring our religious curiosity to. You want to be in that space and hold that space as sacred with people. And that's the ministry. And it is fulfilling.
Now, this is such a pleasure to have this time with you. We have to wrap it up.
Yes, sir.
Just because there's, I have a dear friend, Boaz. He lives in Israel. I met him in a leadership program, and he would say, "We have all the time in the world, but we have to move right now." So
that's it.
I feel like here we are. We gotta move.
Yeah, and I got to go to class tonight. So
I know, right?
Right.
I mean, it's like the torrent of things. How can Coach Train EDU support you? If people want to see more, if people, get the recording and want to reach out, what are the best ways? And how can this community?
Well, number one, I have, there's information about me at dralynwaller.com, and and then you can reach me at executivecoach20@gmail.com. There's tons of stuff. If you want to just get to know me, there's tons of stuff out there. If you Google my name, a bunch of YouTubes of my singing and music and preaching, because right now, everything I do is online. So every Sunday morning at the Enon Tabernacle Baptist Church, it comes on YouTube, it comes on Facebook. So our whole life is out there. And I'm actually grateful for the pandemic for this reason. Had the pandemic not hit, I never would have made it through 1.0. My travel schedule is of such that I never would have had 6 full months of every Wednesday from 5 for me, from 5 to 7. I never would have done it. And I'm so grateful that I had nothing else to do but be home. And now I'm committed. I'm gonna ride this thing through. But I would not have made it had I not had to be home. And so, in fact, I was actually in class when I found out I had COVID. Wow. It was amazing. We were in class and the phone rang, and normally I would not pick up the phone, but I knew I had just taken the test and had facilitated testing in the Black community. And I'm in class and being told, you tested positive, and this was April of last year. So it scared me to death, because all I knew was that people were dying and we didn't know what we know now. And I'm actually grateful I was on that in the conversation when I got that information. So this has been a really wonderful experience.
I didn't know that. Yeah, your name came up, and I knew something was, because we have it in a system, and the trainers let us know when something happens. So I didn't connect it that was you. Because we only a few participants that we know got it. My parents got it in Pittsburgh.
Okay.
Like 2 months ago now, and then they came out for Christmas after. But we knew it was so great. This is easy. Like, we don't have to worry about, because they got it like a month before they came out. So I imagine you feel like you have super immunity. I
still do have antibodies. Right. I'm in a study, so I get tested every month to test my antibodies. And as of 11 months, I still have over 250, whatever that means, antibodies. And so they're trying to figure out why some people have it, why some people don't,
Right.
and what are the implications of that for the vaccine.
Right.
Will everybody who got the vaccine now have to get it again next year? Will they have to get a booster?
Or is it like chickenpox? If you get it,
or is it like chickenpox?
Yeah. You know, like my parents too. Like my dad's donating blood like mad. Like, you know, as much as he's a big guy.
Exactly. That's right. That's right.
They can turn that out.
Cool.
Alyn, again, it's such a pleasure. We'll find ways to work together. I know it.
Absolutely.
And thank you for all of this. You know, time is precious. This, you know, it's such a gift for you to share your heart and, you know, be a part of this community. I am really thankful that you're part of the Coach Training ED community.
And I am as well, and look forward. If anybody's watching that's going to be in class tonight, we'll see you tonight at 8:00.
Excellent.
All right.
Thank you again.
Thank you,
everyone. This has been another Coach No First podcast. See you, everyone.